Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. Our mission here at FFF has been since our inception to present an uncompromising case for the libertarian philosophy. As part of our series on why it's time to end the war on drugs, I'm joined by Congressman Ron Paul. Ron certainly needs no introduction, but I'll give him a short one anyway. He's a former multi-term congressman from Texas and former presidential candidate in 1988, 2008, and 2012. Ron is the founder and chairman of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, an organization that's doing absolutely fantastic work. In fact, they just had a recent conference that was just absolutely awesome. I had the good fortune to participate in that conference, and all the speeches are online at the Ron Paul Institute's website. Ron, this war on drugs, as you know, has been going on for a long time. And you have long been one of the biggest critics of this government program. Would you explain to people why it is that you are so fervently opposed to the war on drugs?
Well, mainly because it's a war on liberty. We talk about the war on drug, and it's a attention getter, and it's very important. But to me, it's the war against liberty, the war against people being allowed to take their own risk, make their own choices. That in a free society, people make those decisions and assume that responsibility. So yes, it is a war on drugs, but it's a war on choice and war on responsibility. Some people even take the war on drugs and narrow it down. Oh, we want to legalize marijuana because some people like to smoke this stuff, but it isn't that at all. Matter of fact, I think that distracts from the real issue of saying, why are we interested in that? Even though that would be enough for me, just the morality of allowing people to make their own choices. But the war on drugs specifically has caused a tremendous explosion of antagonism toward individuals' liberty in all areas. There are civil liberties, there are property rights, it's the judicial system, the racism that goes on, it contributes and combines with economic problems. It just makes this problem so much bigger. What amazes me so much in us failing to do our job is that the example that people should be looking at is prohibition of alcohol. It didn't work. But the interesting thing about prohibition of alcohol was that back then, in the old days, they thought they had to change, the Constitution to prohibit people from drinking alcohol. But today, they wouldn't even consider that. They just write a regulation. Congress writes a law. They violate the Constitution. They never look at it on a principle, and they certainly don't look at it as a libertarian. So to me, it's a threat on liberty. It's been extremely successful for those who want to build an authoritarian government, a centralized government, and a police state. And they're doing quite well. But fortunately, due to the work that you have done and many others, people are waking up. I used to say in the campaign, freedom is popular, and I still believe that, talking to a lot of young people, but we haven't transmitted that into difference in policy. But first, the ideas have to change, then the policies will follow.
Yeah, it's true. We've made a lot of progress. If you go back to Milton Friedman's essay that he wrote in Newsweek, I think it was in 1972, calling for an end to the war on drugs. And then later he wrote that famous open letter to the drug czar Bill Bennett in 1990, calling for an end to the war on drugs. And everything he predicted has come to pass of what it's done to American society. And your focus on liberty is really interesting. But would you explain to people who say, look, why should liberty involve doing things that are harmful, that people say drugs are not good for you? A lot of young people are on drugs. And doesn't it send a message when you legalize drugs that says it's good to take drugs, it's okay to take them? And why should that be part of freedom, doing something that's harmful to you?
Well, that argument would say that if we legalize freedom of choice in intellectual matters and religious matters, that you're legalizing atheism. Isn't that horrible? You know, we should all have beliefs. It also means that if you legalize freedom in intellectual spheres, that means you're going to endorse and allow people to read what socialism is all about and communism all about. Just think of the harm done intellectually and in religions that go astray. It's horrendous. It's compared to what people might do to harm themselves, you know, with the legalization of allowing people to put into their bodies what they want, you know, is minuscule. But the other principle is, just as it would apply to what you read and what you believe in religiously or what you put in your bodies, it means that you are conceding that governments can protect us against ourselves. Everything that we do, every process, every economic transaction, every social transaction. Some people may believe that certain sexual practices lead to disease. So we must protect them and tell them exactly what they can do. And if they violate the rules, we should have cameras in their house. And, oh, no, that's going too far. That's not what we're talking about. But the principle, whether it applies to drugs, nutritional products, raw milk, economic transactions of all sorts, as long as there's no violence involved, and also, you know, reading matter. But some people do like to, you know, restrict people. Right now, you know, the political correctness movement is moving in the wrong directions, and it's becoming more authoritarian all the time.
Yeah, your point about violence is an important one, because don't we libertarians draw a distinction that if you go and commit a violent crime when you're on drugs, it's a whole different case, isn't it?
Absolutely, there is a limit. They say libertarians have no rules, but the rules of the marketplace are very, very strict. So people can't hurt each other. Now, government, it's turned over to the government. If we have so little confidence in people taking care of themselves economically or medically, why is it that we pick a few people who love power? Their whole goal in life is power over the people. And we pick them up and stick them in government, and they make decisions for all of us. Yes, freedom has imperfections. A lot of people will make mistakes, but the mistakes are limited to what they do wrong, and they suffer the consequence, and they should benefit by the right decision. But if you accept this idea of authoritarianism, that there's a unique group of people out here who are volunteering and demanding that we tell people how to live and what kind of economic transactions there should be, all of a sudden things are going to be all right. But the plain truth is, when they make a mistake, it affects all of us. And just think of what the government does, whether it's the Congress, which is now backstepping. They don't assume any responsibility for guiding us in the right direction, but they defer to the courts and to the president to just write rules. We have it so obscene on what they do. The laws are supposed to be written by Congress, but laws today are written by unelected bureaucrats, and they answer to nobody. You know, and they take a small little phrase from the Congress and they do anything they want. And the president is so defiant. If the Congress, you know, doesn't do it, I'll do it myself. So when it comes to this war on drugs, they literally have done that, and that has added to the militarization of the police. But I think the violence in the inner city is very much connected to the drug issue. I think poverty is a big deal, and makes people very poor in the inner cities, and all of a sudden there's no jobs due to government policy. So what do? They say, well, where do you make the money? You make the money in the drug trade. So they go and get involved in the drug trade. They become violent, and the police have to get more violent, and they have to enforce these laws. And of course, we're a country that has more prisoners than anybody else. And we have 5% of the population and 20% of the prisoners, but most of it's related to drugs. And, you know, somebody quoted me the other day as saying I'd release all the nonviolent prisoners, and they added them up. And there's a lot. It's not just the drug trade, but the prisons would be empty. But guess who lobbies for this kind of stuff, for these drug laws? It's the people who run prisons. It's the people who want to sell them prescription drugs. Now, if you want to talk about protecting people against drugs, you ought to teach them that you be very careful what your doctor prescribes, because they're careless. They give you drugs, you get addicted, and then the drug companies gouge you for it, And that is real where the violence that should be curtailed by government. The government has created that system, and of course, the way the payments go with Obamacare, it actually encourages, the monopoly control over drugs, and the more prescription and the more times we need inoculations and all the things, all the fear that's concocted, the worse the situation gets. But it all violates liberty. They have no confidence, no understanding, and no desire to live in a free society, unlike many of the founding fathers who certainly steered us in the right direction, but it wasn't too long after that we sort of lost our vision about exactly where we go, especially in the last 100 years. 100 years ago, it was quite a bit different on drugs. But I tell people, when I was in high school and grade school, I worked in a drugstore. I could sell codeine over the counter for cough medicine. And I never saw an abuse of it. We didn't even know that it was there. So it has nothing to do with the availability. Matter of fact, we were more intrigued by smoking a cigarette because, it was more intriguing because it was illegal. But nobody went in and started buying codeine to be used over the counter.
Yeah, it's sort of the forbidden fruit concept. It makes it attractive for young people. But okay, so liberty is at the core of your principles when it comes to ending the war on drugs. It's obviously a program that has failed. I mean, by its own terms, it has failed. Everybody understands it. There's a lot of still drug usage and drug abuse. And it seems, Ron, that they take a social problem, whether it's drug addiction or alcoholism addiction or prescription drugs, and they say, well, we've got this social problem and we now have to have government solve it. And government never solves it. They only make it worse. And you mentioned the market. But here with drug illegality, we're really talking about a black market that brings into existence this violent culture of gangs, right?
Yes, and we make it that much worse because when it gets in the black market, you can make profits. And like the poor people I was talking about in the inner city, that sometimes is the only thing that they can see before them where they can actually make a living. But it's artificial. The fact that marijuana is called a weed. We take a weed that's totally worthless and turn it into something that they'll fight and kill over. And we create the gangs. We have border problems, believe me. And there are a lot of half-truths floating around on borders. But one thing that they have forgotten about now that people are terrified about, the jihadists are coming, they haven't talked as much about the drug war, but there's still a lot of violence on the borders because of the drug war. So the people who want the conditions to continue are the drug dealers and sometimes the evangelicals because they want to do what's right. Their motivations are good, but they say we have to have these laws to make people better. But it gets near this theocracy idea that we can make people better. Some people think they can make us better, individually and socially, and other people think we can make the economy much fairer and safer. While we're doing it, we're going to make a lot of money making it fairer and safer for somebody else that only there to do the things that they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, well, you also mentioned the racist aspects of this war on drugs. I mean, we know it falls on everybody of all races, colors, and creeds, the adverse consequences, but disproportionately, it really is African Americans. And Michelle Alexander, the African American professor, has written this great book called The New Jim Crow, which is what she calls the drug war. Would you talk a little bit about that aspect of the war on drugs?
See, and this is something the average Republican could never talk about, because if you're poor and in the inner city and you use crack cocaine, you could go to prison for life. Sometimes, if it's a third offense, you may go to prison for life, even though you've never committed a violent act. But if you're rich, and I know some rich people, and they've been in the media and in Hollywood, they've been on drugs, and they've been, and they're illegal type of drugs. They have the money to fight the cases. In the same way, when you look to the death penalty, the same way the judicial system is a real mess, and the drug war contributes a lot to it. So yes, I don't like the IRS or the FBI or the Federal Reserve, but the judicial system is really messed up, and it's quite apparent in the media today how some people are treated differently by the judicial system. And it to me reminds me that the Magna Carta was significant because they were trying to make the point that the kings actually had to live under the same laws as the people. And they talked about habeas corpus. And so much in the last few years, especially in the last 10 years or so, since 9/11, so much of that's been reversed. And I keep thinking that freedom is a progressive thing, and we always do better, and I believe we still are. But we have setbacks, and we're in a period of setbacks. But we need to re-energize people to believe and understand why they're better off, the world's better off, there's more peace and there's more prosperity, yet the true believers are few and far between. But believe me, we're going to have an opportunity because this system is coming apart. The drug war, I think the neat thing about the drug war is reintroduced the notion of nullification. The states are just, writing laws and changing it, and the Fed is literally the federal government has thrown up their hands. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that in a lot of what we do if we have the breakdown of the economic order, which is quite possible if the world rejects the dollar, and then there will be a lot of nullification. Somebody was pressing me on TV the other day saying, yeah, but Ron, where has there ever been a free market? They've never had it, it never worked. I said, why don't you just look at the underground economy when the government, and the interviewer responds, yeah, like they did in Italy, like they do in Italy and elsewhere, probably in this country too. Maybe that's why we do a little bit better than some people think we should be doing.
Well, as you pointed out, America lived without drug laws for a long time, over a century, and without income taxation and a lot of the
Right.
other. Well, let me wrap this up with one final question. You mentioned the Constitution and liberty and privacy and search and seizure. Would you talk a little bit about the assault on these principles that the drug war has brought?
Well, that's the ultimate evil of the whole thing, because to do good economically or make people behave better by not using drugs, they can only do that with authoritarianism by the government telling us, enforcing us, imprisoning us if we don't do as they say. So it probably, a case could be made for saying that it's the drug war that has been the most, or close to being the most significant event for the undermining of true civil liberties. And I think right now, in combination now with the radical reaction to the terrorist threat, which is blown way out of proportion as a consequence of our foreign policy, but it's also used to undermine our liberties. And when people get frightened, they seem to want to give up. I remember so often after 9/11, people say, well, Ron, yeah, you're right, but we got to be safe. And this is the fallacy. When you lose your liberty, you depend on the government. Just make individuals safe, even safe against themselves and their own behavior, and everything is going to be fair. So people will not be poor, and the government will forcibly redistribute the wealth. Early in our history, in our colonies, they tried socialism. It was a total failure, and they decided that property ownership was much better. And fortunately, by the time of our revolution and the writing of the Constitution, they looked at John Locke and others and decided private property was the way to go. Today, the ideology is prevailing because those in charge believe one thing, but underneath right now, the kind of thing that you're doing, Bumper, and the kind of things that the Mises Institute and others, it is bringing people together, and people are scared and frightened. That's why this political election this year is so chaotic. But if they realize, and actually it's a philosophic fight, then that they have to look elsewhere, not just between two personalities that don't make any sense. If they look toward two philosophies of authoritarianism and liberty and realize history shows that if you really want peace and prosperity, you go the way of individual liberty.
Absolutely. And ideas have consequences. And that's why now the world is moving toward ending this war on drugs. I think it's teetering. We just have to keep pushing. This is Ron Paul. Thank you, Ron, for taking the time to share your perspectives, and thank you for your great work for liberty.